It seems every day I am asked, when are we going to move back into the church? And almost every day I respond the same. I close my eyes so they can't see my eyes rolling back to the back of my head. I stifle a groan. God only knows. It took Father O'Keefe 2 years to build the basilica from the ashes of St. Patrick. And we have just entered our 5th year of renovations. We keep unearthing something new all the time. At first, it was unearthing new things that were rotted and falling apart. Now, we are unearthing treasures that have been hidden for centuries under the floor of the church. Our movement back in is still a bit of a moving target. We're hoping to get back in there by July or August. But God only knows. Not a day goes by that I don't long for the day we move back into that church. That's not entirely true. Sundays, I don't long for the church. Sundays, I don't think about it. Sundays, I am so wrapped up in the beauty, the splendor, the wonder, and the faithfulness of the people who fill this space that I cannot even begin to think of any other space. Sundays gives me a nice respite from the longing for something else. Truth is, God does know when we're going to move back in. And at least one day a week, that's enough for me. You know, the hearers of Jesus in the temple area heard Jesus give a prediction of what would happen in the future, but the first hearers of the Gospel of St. Luke heard a description. By the time Luke had written his gospel and the first hearers were listening to it, everything that Jesus had predicted had either already happening or was currently happening. Christians had already been expelled from the temple. They were already being handed over by family members and were already being persecuted and killed. The temple had already been destroyed by Rome. There was an insurrection of Judeans, and the Romans came and mercilessly and horribly beat it down and destroyed the temple so that there was not one stone standing on another. Mount Vesuvius had already erupted over Pompeii, spewing ash and soot into the Mediterranean sky, covering most of that area in sooty darkness. And so everything that Jesus had talked about as a prediction, the hearers of St. Luke's gospel were hearing as description. That's what's already happening. And what Jesus tells them in the Gospel of St. Luke is that God knows how this will end. God knows how he is going to take care of this. God knows how he is going to restore order through all of this chaos. God knows. God has been doing this for a very long time. And so don't get all wrapped up in the chaos of the moment, because there's more happening in this moment than just chaos. God is still in control. God is still powerful. God's plan is still in effect. Sometimes all we can say is God knows, and let that be enough. Because when we get so wrapped up in the chaos, the pain, the injustice, everything else, then we become blind to everything that God is doing now. As we come to the end of the year, I've heard somebody describe the readings of the church as directing our attention to the end times. That's not true. What the church is directing our attention to is not the end time. It's not what's going to happen. It's in the now. It wants us to be focused in the now. That everything that has happened throughout history. There have always been plagues. There have always been starvation. There has always been poverty. There has always been injustice. There's always been violence. There's always been evil in this world. When it will end, God knows. God knows when, He knows where, He knows how. And so the only question for us is living in this moment, because this moment is all that we have. And it may be an imperfect moment, but it is what we are given. And the question is, how will I live my faith in this imperfect moment? It's not about looking to what will come. It's looking into the very now, into the here. Looking into the faces of the people who are here now, not the people who will be here in 10 years. God knows how all of this will end. It is to us to trust that He knows what He's doing, and He will do it in good time. We don't know what our children will grow up to be, but God does. Love your children as faithfully as you can, and trust that God knows how to do what God does. We don't know when or if justice will ever completely reign in our country, but God knows. And so we live as justly as we can in this moment and trust that God will bring about His justice in His time and in His way. We don't know what the results of a doctor's visit will bring, but God does. And so we trust that God knows what He's doing, and we live our life fully in the moment that we are given, and trust that God will take care of what happens later. So often we get caught up in the chaos of things like, will our president be impeached? Will he be convicted? Will he win re-election? We get caught up in all of these things about the future, and the truth is that God only knows, but God does know. And so what we do is we live our life as faithfully and as fully as we can in the moment that we're given, because it is all we are given. There have always been people on thrones who didn't deserve to be there, and God has always handled it. We don't need to get caught up in the chaos of that. We need to live faithfully, justly, lovingly, mercifully, to the extent that we are able in the here and the now, and trust that God knows everything else, and that in His own way, in His own time, in His own manner, God will take care of everything else. This is the only moment we're given. It is all that we're guaranteed. It is an imperfect moment. It is filled with imperfect people. It is filled with imperfect events. It is filled with all kinds of things. It is also filled with grace. It is filled with hope. It is filled with promise. The question for us, living this moment, is what will we follow? God has been God for a very long time. God has seen everything that can be seen. God has already taken care of problems that come up. There is nothing that God cannot do. Trust that God will do it, and live this moment as faithfully as we can.